My guest today is Luke Barwikowski. Luke is the CEO and founder at Pixels, which is a Web3 social gaming platform. We'll learn all about this today. Looks really cool. Welcome to the show, Luke.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It is a pleasure. We'll do what we do at the beginning of the show, Luke. It would be cool if you could please introduce yourself. I'd love to hear a little bit of your personal and professional backstory. What have you been doing in the lead up to, founding Pixels?
Yeah, totally. My name is Luke. I'm the founder and CEO of Pixels. I grew up learning how to code. Like I started coding when I was like 12 years old. And that's kind of how I got here. So I have a technical background. I started making games when I was 12, which is funny enough. Coming back here, I was a software engineer for a little bit, and I took a break from that. I lived like a very alternative lifestyle for a minute. I was like crewing on sailboats and doing a bunch of weird stuff like that, living on farms. And then, during that, I started what became Pixels. Pixels didn't start off as a Web3 game. We kind of ended up here, which is cool. And at first, what we were doing was we were building like virtual meeting software. If you know the product Gather.town, we were actually directly competing with Gather.town for a while. That kind of like, it's like a mix of Pokemon and Zoom. And yeah, that business wasn't really working for us, is what I can say. And we basically went into full pivot mode trying to figure out like, okay, well, we have this cool tech. How do we use it? And we landed on integrating NFTs into that tech beforehand, and it got a ton of traction inside of Web3. And then at the same time, Axie Infinity was having its come up at the time too. And I was fascinated by Axie Infinity and the whole thought process around virtual nation building at the time. I studied computer science and economics in university, and I love economics. That's kind of the stuff that really drew me into building in Web3. And I thought it was the coolest thing that Web3, you have the chance to build an economy ground up. Just like the nerd in me was really, really lighting up when we were deciding what we want to do, where we wanted to go. And that actually ended up being really good founder market fit for me as well. And we moved into Web3 in October 2021, and we started doing it a little bit differently than maybe other Web3 companies, where we released a product really, really early. The first demo of our game was available in November 2021, and we've been building in public since then. So what it's allowed us to do is basically build with the community and end up where we're at now, where we have a Web3 game, live economy, the Pixel token released in February, and we've been iterating, experimenting since then.
Awesome. Yep, great summary. So I think it'd be good then if you describe a little bit about, what Pixels is. Love to just hear how it works at the top of the show. I guess from a user perspective or from a player perspective. Yeah, what is Pixels? What is the kind of intention of the game? What can people get out of it?
So what we're trying to do at Pixels is we're trying to make play to earn work. We're huge believers in play to earn. What we've been experimenting with over the last year or two is kind of figuring out how you actually make play to earn sustainable and viable. And we have a social game that we released a while ago. We've been iterating and building on top of it since then, and kind of trying to figure out, okay, what are the pieces to actually make play to earn work that you need to build? Our take now is that there's actually still a ton of infrastructure required to build out play to earn. To me, the whole point of Web3 is basically coordinating people to do actions that help benefit an ecosystem. It's all about incentive design and economics. And that's a lot of the work that still needs to get built inside of play to earn, which we're trying to tackle. So we're answering some of the big questions in Web3. Essentially, how do you distribute tokens in a way that benefits the ecosystem? How do you identify players who are more likely to be using the token inside of an ecosystem? How do you actually distribute the token? Like, what are the actual mechanisms inside of a game or an ecosystem to do so? And like all of the stuff around there. So we've been investing a lot on the data side. We've been investing a lot on different game design and new system designs inside of Web3 gaming. And we think that this is one, generalizable. We think that the questions that people are asking inside of Web3 gaming and the problems that Web3 games are tackling are actually really the full stack of Web3 consumer application problems. And these are the problems that have the first use case finally where we can start to actually implement some of these strategies. And there's a lot here to dig into essentially. But yeah, I think the core thesis here is, can play to earn work? And if so, how do you do it? And that's what Pixels is trying to tackle.
Yeah, got it. Thank you, Luke. And as I understand it, you guys began on a Polygon, right? But you have since moved over to the Ronin Network. So, and I believe that was a good move. That was a smart move. That helped your growth metrics. Just explain why Ronin is a better fit for Pixels. Do you think?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of things you need to make a Web3 game work. In Web2 gaming, you have pretty interesting distribution platforms like the App Store or Steam or the Epic Games Store. And Web3 seemed like it was missing that for a long time. You know, you couldn't get on the App Store with a Web3 game, and we were really missing major distribution channels inside of Web3 gaming to bootstrap the network that you need to solve these problems to focus on the fundamentals of Web3 gaming, right? You can't figure out the fundamentals of Web3 gaming. Essentially, you know, I like to frame it in terms of CAC to LTV. Like our main milestone over the next 6 months is basically figuring out how we can start to have people spending more tokens inside of our ecosystem than we give out. But if you have no players to experiment with, you're never going to get there. So Ronin was an amazing distribution channel that was really untapped. We moved there. Ronin had done the hard work of onboarding millions of players into their ecosystem. They had millions of people that download their wallet, and that is not easy to do, right? They had the fortunate problem, or they had the fortunate predicament where they, you know, had built Axie Infinity. They had onboarded and done a lot of the work of onboarding millions and millions of players into the Ronin network through Axie. And, you know, they had all these players that were just kind of sitting there waiting for more experiences. And, you know, we were able to take advantage of that really early on. So Ronin's been an amazing partner to work with. They kind of solved a lot of the initial bootstrapping problems inside of Web3 gaming, and they had a ton of players there. So it was a really obvious choice for us to move there, even though if it wasn't so obvious at the time. You know, I remember when we initially moved to Ronin, I had a lot of people wondering why we would move to Ronin. And I was getting a lot of questions around it. And after we did it, I don't think anybody questions that. Now everybody wants to build on Ronin because they understand distribution in Web3 is king. Getting that initial like first 100,000 players, million players is extremely difficult, and you want as little friction to that as possible so you can actually solve the hard problems inside of Web3 gaming. So we're so blessed to be working with that team. That team is also really smart and on top of it too, because you also don't know what problems you're going to run into Web3 gaming until you're actually in the arena and building inside of it and have a live Web3 game that's out. And that team knows what it takes to build a Web3 game, right? Like they've been there, they were in the trenches, they have launched Axie, they've seen problems come with it, they've also solved a lot of those problems too. And that's been the other advantage of working with them, where we get to kind of get their advice, their knowledge, share ideas with them on things that would maybe work inside of Web3 gaming, things that wouldn't. Like they've saved us a ton of time from going down rabbit holes that they already tried that didn't work, and we get to bounce ideas off of them too. So it's been, yeah, an amazing partnership. I'm so happy to be working with them, and yeah, it's worked out really well so far.
Very nice. Sounds good. Look, you know, it'd be good to understand then. You talked about how it's very difficult to get that first segment of users, you know, to go from 0 to 100,000, if you like. So let's understand how many users or players you guys think you have with Pixels at the moment. And one of the keys also, I think, as you kind of alluded to it, I think you've been quite clever in that you've made it really easy for people to join in terms of having, you know, a low barrier to entry. So like, for example, you don't need to purchase a whole set of different interacting NFTs or anything like that just to begin. So maybe just, yeah, love to understand where you guys are at the moment in terms of players or active players or however you kind of like to understand it. And again, yeah, just explain how people can join and how easy it is. And then maybe you talked about the Pixels token. So then maybe after that, we'll move to the tokenomics.
Yeah, so we've had over 7 million registered wallets play Pixels. It looks about like 4 million real DAU. Yeah, it's funny because I we were one of the ones that were really pushing DAU inside of Web3 gaming initially, and I think it's a good initial metric to look at. Like if you don't have any daily active addresses or daily active users playing the game, that's a bad thing. I also don't think it's the best metric of success moving forward either. But 7 million registered wallets, about 4 million real DAU after we've done a lot of bot clean sweeping, things like this as well. And then the more interesting thing is our revenue numbers as well. We've been averaging about 2.5 million in revenue a month for the token. And that's going to be what we're focused on moving forward. Like that's the best metric of success for a game. I think, the spend is what speaks when it comes to traction, success, and if you actually have real users inside of the game and ecosystem, or at least valuable users inside of the game and ecosystem. But yeah, our numbers keep increasing. Revenue is increasing as well month by month. I feel like we're in a pretty good spot with that.
Yep, sounds good. All right. Tokenomics, the token loop.
Yeah, so how we view free-to-play gaming, or how we view Web3 gaming, is we think it's going to mock or follow a lot of the steps of Web2 gaming with a free-to-play ecosystem. So in Web2 gaming, there's a freemium model normally. You acquire users, and about like 95% of your users never spend any money inside of the ecosystem, and about 5% of users do. Typically, games are monetizing like a very small portion of their user base, right? And in Web3 gaming, we think that same split of users probably follows. Now, what we're interested in is kind of a new form of user acquisition that doesn't exist inside of Web2 gaming. That's where the bulk of the tokenomics lie, if you want to call it tokenomics. I think tokenomics is still kind of a funny word, but I think it is actually really important to think about when you think about, how you're actually going to be using the token, how it's distributed, all of that. There's so much depth that we can go into there. There's a theoretical side of tokenomics. There's a practical side. There's a combination of like thinking about markets and all of this kind of stuff. But when we think about how we distribute our token, what we're trying to do is we're trying to basically innovate on user acquisition. That to me is the bulk of the advantage of building a Web3 game. And a lot of it lies through play to earn. So the thesis is instead of spending money on ads to grow a game, most games, what they'll do is they'll build a game, they'll spend like a couple million building the game, and then they'll spend like 10 million a month advertising the game. And what happens is there's actually a lot of inefficiency in this. The performance marketing or the ad space inside of Web2 gaming is actually really broken right now. And it's actually kind of rent seeking from the ad publishers right now. So there's this really hard problem inside of Web2 gaming where basically advertisers like the Google, the Facebooks, the Apples are really pinching the margins inside of Web2 gaming. There's a ton of inefficiency and they're kind of keeping Web2 game margins at like a certain percent. So even if Facebook unlocks efficiency in their ad distribution, they're going to be taking that profit and that delta basically. And the interesting part about Web3 gaming lies in if you can actually take that same amount of budget that you would be spending on ads, do you unlock extra efficiencies if you distribute that ad budget directly to your players? Now, there's a whole lot of stuff to actually dig into when you try to do this because people will try to break it, they'll try to abuse it. And you have to think about really hard who are the right people to be giving this token to. You have to figure out how you identify those people. But that's the bulk of our tokenomics, I would say. It's quite simple. If you look at our emissions charts, we have a large percentage of tokens distributed for ecosystem rewards, which we've been mostly distributing through play to earn mechanics inside of the game. But then when you actually dig into how we distribute it, who we're distributing tokens to, I would say that's the bulk of the tech at Pixels right now. So what we're more interested in figuring out is when we have a player inside of our ecosystem, how do we identify who the good players are? When I say good player, there's a couple of different things we look at. One, we think about, okay, if this player is coming into the ecosystem, do they provide value to the ecosystem? And value is it's not so clear, right? Like there are free-to-play players inside of the game that actually provide a lot of value. Even if they never spend any money inside of the game, they actually still might be net positive to the ecosystem, right? And then there's also players that spend money inside of the game too, the whales. And that's a really important persona as well. Those are the people who are probably net spenders that are kind of funding a lot of the acquisition that we might do in the same way that happens inside of a Web2 game. In a Web2 game, you'll spend $10 million a month advertising to people and you'll get a bunch of players inside your game. You might get like, if you're spending 10 million, get 1 million players from that ecosystem. You'll have 950,000 players that never spend a dime, and you're spending money supporting these people. All right, and they cost you infrastructure costs, they cost you servers, and they cost advertising cost as well too. Now the question is, out of those free-to-play players, like how do we decide who are the ones that are actually providing value to the ecosystem? And we look at things like, okay, are they playing the game in certain ways that make it so that the game is more fun for more people? Are they here purely to extract? Is that a bad thing if they are? Are they, bots, or are they like running server farms to like, try to farm the token? That's clearly someone that we don't want to give tokens to. And then there's also different player personas that are interesting to the ecosystem too, like people that are, creating content, people that are playing the game socially and very active in the Discord. And then, we're also looking at spend per player as well. So some of the stuff that we've been doing over the last, 6 months since the token's been live is basically getting data on users, looking at their behaviors, kind of clustering them together in different segments. And now the next stage of what we're about to do is kind of segment-based token rewards. So, we have a good idea of the type of behavior inside of our game and ecosystem that leads to ecosystem success. And now the experiments are going to start where we're going to start targeting rewards in more specific ways to these users. It's basically like one big coordination problem and a whole host of economics. I think if you're an economics nerd, there's similarities to Keynesian economics. In the Keynesian economics, the thesis is if you put incentives in the right places, or if you put spend in the right places, it leads to outsized returns in specific areas, right? Like if you were to, as a country, give money or budget from taxes to social programs, you might start to see more people spending money in different ways that help boost the economy total, which actually leads to better gains. We kind of viewed what we're doing here in a very similar way. It's almost like applied Keynesian economics in certain aspects. And that's kind of the idea and the thesis here. So yeah, when you start to explain it like that, it's not so easy. It's kind of complicated, but that's the fun challenge set here inside of Web3 gaming. It's coordinating millions of users to achieve a shared goal of building out the ecosystem, growing the ecosystem, and leading to like the most fun game environment possible.
Yeah, really nice, Luke. And that's kind of a funny way of describing, anything from, economic and country design through to simulation theory. They're all just kind of different experiments in, governance, economics, and community. And you can do it in the real world, or you can do it in the physical world, the virtual world, the digital world, certainly the Web3 world. So yeah, fascinating. And you guys are running, you describe it as chapter 2, right? But that's part of what you were talking about is, just applying those learnings and making sure that the more interesting players, or the players that do bring value to the ecosystem, making sure that they remain engaged and get rewarded and so on, right?
Yeah, exactly. So at Pixels, we just released a whole new version of the game just about a month ago. And we called it Chapter 2. And that was basically one of our first steps to kind of towards this direction. So our tokenomics were a bit more simple in Chapter 1 of the game. I was running from February to June. We had pretty simple token distribution mechanisms, and maybe only like one or two segments of users that we were distributing tokens to. And essentially, Chapter 2 is a big redesign of game systems where we can start to introduce more progression and more things inside of the game that help us identify who these users are that are doing things like leveling and progressing through the game, and adding like a lot more gameplay that allowed us to get some of the data that we need, this kind of stuff. So we're really big risk takers at Pixels. We don't want to work on something that we don't think is working. Even though the numbers inside of Chapter 1 look solid, we knew that if we kept it going in the same way as it wasn't where it needed to be in order to solve these hard problems inside of Web3 gaming. And this is the kind of stuff we're most interested in. We're not trying to build something that is just going to have a launch and then fade away into obscurity. Like, we're actually trying to solve the fundamentals of Web3 gaming. And we have to take risk if we don't think we're actually making progress towards that. And that was kind of the intention behind Chapter 2. Add in new gameplay that's more engaging and more fun, but also new ways inside of the gameplay to identify users to help them, to help us understand who are the right players inside the ecosystem to distribute rewards to. And it's funny because I talk so much about economics when I'm on podcasts or things like this, and the gameplay is important too, but also like this is all a part of it, right? Like this, whether you like it or not, if you have a Web3 game, it's a live digital economy. You have to be thinking about this kind of stuff in order to grow it, and the gameplay is part of it. It's also this side of things too that are quite important.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, love to understand, how you think about the next few phases in terms of, what is coming up on your product roadmap, or what you're working on. What are the next phases? What what do you want to kind of achieve over the next 6 to 12 months, and what can users expect?
Yeah, there's a lot. We are quite busy at Pixels right now, which is fun and it's an exciting time. So I will say there's one key milestone that we're racing towards, and that's what I like to call net ecosystem spend. So essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to make it so that more people are using the token inside of the game or its in-game use than we give out through play to earn rewards. For us, that's kind of cracking the Web2 equivalent of positive, customer acquisition cost, positive CAC to LTV, lifetime value of a user. And it's not so easy to do that. There's a lot of key like dissidents in Web3 gaming where some people don't think that's possible even, but we think it is. So for us, what that looks like and what we're trying to achieve is basically increasing revenue month by month until we hit a certain milestone, and essentially increasing our ARPU, or average revenue per user, through introducing new types of game mechanics, new systems, and getting more efficient with our token distribution too. So there's two sides of the equation, right? There's how you distribute the token, and there's also how people are using the tokens. So we're focused on both of these things. On the token distribution side, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get smarter about how we give tokens out to our users, like I had previously described. Essentially, it's a lot of data science that we're doing. So essentially segmenting users, clustering users together, kind of doing this like cool economic distribution. And there's also the like demand side. So that's how the token's actually used inside of the game, the compelling gameplay reasons to be using it. And then there's also a portion of ecosystem growth that we're experimenting with too. So over the next 6 to 12 months, in terms of gameplay, what users can expect is, we're going to start to introduce a couple of new systems inside of the game. So we're like, even next week, I think, is when we're going to start to do our new live ops system, where we'll start to introduce more like limited time events, where there's going to be prize pools and different things to earn pixel inside of the game, but also combined with new gameplay that has syncs. So there's some cool stuff there. Like, for example, we have like this new Guild Wars contest that will be coming out next week, and that's essentially going to unlock like a whole new live ops strategy that we have when it comes to keeping people engaged and introducing live ops token syncs as well. So in addition to that, we're also working on like really big gameplay improvements. So there's new systems that will start to bring into the core gameplay as well. What Pixels is kind of lacking right now, which we want to start to make better, is more end gameplay. It's funny how the game is getting played now. Yeah, there's like a very straight line meta into the game that's kind of developed over the last month of Chapter 2. We want to start to introduce new pathways of gameplay for people to be doing. So that's going to mean like new systems. Like one that we're really interested in is this idea of contestable land, basically like this new type of land that players and guilds are going to be able to compete for, which should introduce more syncs inside of the game when it comes to resource syncs and different forms of competition. And then the other thing that we're really, really interested in too is the ecosystem as well. So there's a couple of cool things that we're going to start to do. You might see some announcements over the next month or two. Is we're actively working on either acquiring or publishing a few other games inside of the ecosystem as well. So one thing that we have that not really anybody else in the space has is this data set and these methods of token distribution that are actually going to be quite helpful to other teams. What we're able to start to do now is we're actually able to identify good users of like good potential users in our ecosystem quite early. And the play to earn thesis is, okay, if we can actually establish and identify good users in the ecosystem early, those are the people that we probably want to give rewards to early inside of the ecosystem to get them to stay. So we're going to try to do some acquisitions of other games, IP, and maybe a publishing deal or two, and help them use our technology as well. The intention behind that is if we do acquisitions, we want basically them to come like completely into our ecosystem and add either secondary game loops or different game experiences for our users that will use the Pixel token. Or if we do the publishing deal, it's basically like, okay, you're going to launch the game, you're either going to like use the Pixel token for your monetization, or you're going to like do some form of token swap with us. And then yeah, the idea there is, anybody that we work with, we want them to be using our tools and some of our token distribution methods. It's a really, really big value add that we can provide to teams. And then, yeah, there's some other side quests that we have going on too. Like, for example, we're quite interested in the Telegram ecosystem and seeing if we can launch some new distribution channels through that way. Telegram seems like it's a potentially very, very interesting new distribution channel. There's actually ways that we might be able to vampire attack some of the Telegram distribution and bring it over to Ronin as well if we do it properly. Like, for example, we're probably going to go live with a Telegram game in about 4 weeks. And the idea is, we'll probably set aside a prize pool for people that use this Telegram game, but you have to come to Ronin, actually collect your reward. So there's some cool stuff there that we're doing too. So essentially, the plan is we want to keep growing the ecosystem. Our KPI is, revenue increasing month by month with the end goal and milestone of this net ecosystem spend.
Got it. Very interesting, Luke. Lots coming up then. So I suppose as we finish up this part of the podcast, Luke, it'd be good if you could maybe just share, what should people do? Where should they go if they're not already a Pixel player? What is the best way for people to get involved?
Yeah, I mean, Pixels is really easy to start playing. You can even play on your phone if you want. All you need is either an email to log in with, or if you have a Ronin wallet or MetaMask, you can sign up that way. Right now we're kind of targeting a more Web3 audience, and that's kind of the easiest go-to-market that we have. Eventually, we're going to start to target more of a Web2 audience, but I don't think that's the right approach until we solve some of these fundamental questions first. And actually, once we get positive, CAC to LTV and the token framework. But yeah, you can go to play.pixels.xyz or pixels.xyz and just start playing basically immediately. You don't need anything to start playing.
Awesome. So pixels.xyz, link is in the show notes as well, folks. Well, it is time to finish off the show, Luke, and we will do that by running you through the very famous Crypto Conversation hot take round. Are you up for it?
I'm ready.
All right, Luke, I'm just going to run some questions at you. Just want you to give me kind of, quick, snappy, hot take style answers. Question 1 for you is a bit of a funny one, but let's see what you have to say. It is, where would you say that you sit on the Bitcoin maximalist to multi-chain opportunist spectrum?
I mean, what I'll say is I personally would rather own a lot of Bitcoin than US dollars, if I'm talking about my own personal net worth. When it comes to building out an ecosystem, I'm still an EVM maxi, I would say. It's kind of hard to build on Bitcoin, and there's not so many use cases in my mind. It's very impractical, where I think the application layer really should sit in EVM. But yeah, my own personal net worth, I probably want to hold a lot of Bitcoin or gold, to be honest.
Yeah. All right. A very nuanced answer. What would you say then, Luke, is your firmest conviction crypto opinion?
I am a firm believer in play to earn. I think it's going to work, and I think it's going to change most consumer applications when people figure out how to make it work. And it's funny because that was a really dirty word, play to earn, 6 to 7 months ago. But I think it's the most clear use case of Web3. And I think it's going to change the way that a lot of people interact with consumer applications in general.
Yep. All right. Bill Gates famously said that we tend to overestimate what we can accomplish in 2 years and underestimate what we can accomplish in 10 years. With that in mind, anything you like, but, play to earn, Pixels, what does it look like in 10 years' time?
I think if we pull off what we're trying to pull off, I think Pixels has a shot of being one of the largest gaming companies in the world. In the same breath as Scopely or Zynga, and that's kind of the aspiration here. What we're trying to do is we're trying to take advantage of some of the same things that these companies had done, 10 years ago, where Zynga found new growth channels and new ways to grow games and new approaches to game growth. They were some of the first people to start doing big data with gaming. They were some of the first people to take advantage of social networks for user distribution. And Web3 offers a really similar path to growing. And that's kind of our aspiration, basically. We actually really firmly believe that this will be how most games grow in 10 years. There's still a lot of work to get there, though. There's still a lot of things to prove out.
Yep, absolutely. All right, well, William Gibson famously said that the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. With that in mind, Luke, can you think of an example of the future being here right now, but most people aren't aware of it?
I think there's some really interesting stuff going on in crypto that people somewhat ignore. And I think there's different user behaviors here that I think people don't want to admit are kind of present, but are actually kind of the future. So how I see it is I think a lot of people are becoming more degen even inside of Web 2. Like for example, if you follow GameStop stock, right? Like it looks really similar to how the meme coin markets interact. And I think a lot of user behaviors are kind of leaning in that in general in the US and the West, where people are, you know, using things like stake more often. Like there's more of a gambling behavior and a degenerate behavior, which I think is just going to get more and more popular, to be honest. And I think a lot of people inside of Web3, they kind of ignore that and they ignore like the actual user motivation behind why people are interacting with apps and why people are here. And even in Web2 gaming, like I think they're already recognizing this, like the gotcha mechanics of some of these games that are kind of nuts. And that's where general user behavior is moving towards. And yeah, I think it's just going to be more and more part of normal life 10 years, but it's already here.
Yes, indeed. And it brings us nicely to the final question, Luke, which is, what is your favorite science fiction book, film, or TV show?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm so interested in space travel and that kind of stuff. You know, what's that saying? Too late to explore the high seas, too early to explore space. I mean, Interstellar is one of my favorite movies ever. But I like any movie that just kind of explores space exploration, like 2001 Space Odyssey is really cool too. I mean, that kind of ties into my favorite type of game too. Like my favorite type of game is a walking simulator. So anything that like really interestingly shows um like space environments or things like that, I love it. Or I like the cowboy space adventures too. Like I just rewatched Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and that's one of my favorites, I think.
Yeah, of course. Some absolute classic selections there. Interstellar from Christopher Nolan and look, Douglas Adams. Yeah, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Great selections. Hey, look, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for coming and spending some time with us on the show today, Luke. Yeah, to talk all about Pixels. Just to close down the show, tell people again what they should do, where they should go to, yeah, look at the Pixels gaming experience. And look, please feel free to shout out your Twitter, X profiles, and so on.
Yeah, so we build in public. We're really, really active with that. I mean, if you want to play the game, go to pixels.xyz to play the game. But you can also follow along on the journey with us if you follow our X account. It's pixels_online. And there you'll see a ton of, us interacting with the users. And we're really active in our Discord too. Like I'm in the Discord quite often, talking to people, getting more information from it. And that's one of the most fun parts of being part of the Pixels community. Like you actually get to shape Web3 gaming with us and be a part of the building process. So yeah, go check that out and join the community. It's super fun, wholesome, welcoming. It's not like anything else in Web3.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Luke. All the best and bye for now.